Welcome everybody to another session of the New Game of Leadership. My name is Irina Dimitrova. I'm the organizer of this summit, and I have the great pleasure to have David Savoy today with the topic Beyond the Leadership Trends, Trust as an Invariant of Leadership. David, I don't know that much about you, so I'm curious to hear from yourself what you have to say about your persona. What stuck in my mind was the sentence, I help design companies design governance and learning solutions for organizations to make sense of an old age stumbling block, the human factor.
Yeah.
So this really grabbed me, and take it away. I'm leaving it all to you.
All right. Thank you, Zorina, for the invitation. And I'm very glad to be here today. So for those who don't know me, my name is David Savoy. I work as a consultant and trainer and I have two fields of expertise. The first one is learning and development. I have a background in science of education, and the second one is all the topics and subtopics related to change management and leadership. I also work with executives and managers, and the talk I'm about to give is as I told you, Zarina, it's the continuation of a research I conducted between 2016 and 19 about what we call the invariance of management and leadership. So here we go. Maybe a brief disclaimer before I start. I'm starting with the bad news. Sorry. Here is a list of things you won't find in this talk. So I'm not going to give you any recipe. You won't find the 3 secrets or the 5 truths or the 12 rules you might be looking for. There is no magical solution or what I call fairy tale theories in this talk. I know it sounds a bit, it might sound a bit polemic, but we'll see. So I don't believe these theories exist, and I'm going to try to argue that point. So here is instead what you're going to find in this talk. I'm going to talk about leadership as made of what we call invariance. That's the old game. And contrary to what is suggested by the title of this summit, I don't really believe leadership is a new game. I think it's based on age-old principle, and we're going to explore that idea together. Another thing I'm going to do is I will try to mobilize, as you will see, multidisciplinary knowledge. I believe there are gems in different disciplines, and there is something I really like to do is I like to steal ideas from different theoretical fields. So don't be surprised. And last but not least, I can make you a promise. I promise you that at the end of this talk, you will have more answers than questions. And no, sorry, more questions than answers. And hopefully that's a good thing. So let's go. The invariance of leadership. In Search of Excellence. That's a book published by Peters and Waterman, 2 former consultants of McKinsey in 1983. The book was a massive success. It was a study of the best practices of the 43 most successful companies at the time. They sold 5 million copies of the book. And it was so successful that executives around the world urged their managers to buy the books and to apply the recipes. So here is the interesting part. 5 years later, they made another study on the results of the book. And here is what they found out. 1/3 of the companies mentioned in the book were no longer rated as excellent. And some of them were even experiencing serious financial difficulties. So what does this bring to light? One thing, in my opinion, there is let's call it a psychological phenomena. It's probably also biological and existential to some point, but yeah, a phenomena deeply embedded in our nature, which is the need to create guidelines in order to reassure ourselves in an often, you know, confusing world and complex reality. So I don't want to sound too theoretical here, but here is a quick story. That's the story of a unit of soldiers who got lost in the Alps. I believe it was during the Second World War. I'm not sure. So anyway, they got lost in the Alps, and everybody thought that they were dead. But after 3 days, they reappeared and they came back alive to camp. So obviously there was a debriefing, and they tried to find out, you know, how they had managed to survive. And one of the reasons was one of the soldiers carried a map. The only thing is, after examination, the map was not it was the wrong map. It was the map from another area. So how did it save them? Because it did save them. It's a true story. So how did it save them? For 3 reasons. The first one, it gave them a direction. The second one, it helped them to make sense of their surrounding, of their environment. And lastly, it provided some kind of guideline, you know, to help them come back home. So what does that mean? We humans are complex creatures, and under a surface of logic and rationality, I believe we are deeply, well, I'm not the only one to believe that, but we are deeply chaotic and complex and irrational. And we evolve in a often even more complex world. So we need ways to make sense of it. And we don't really have a choice, because the alternative would be chaos, and that, you know, that's no real alternative. So we need to create those tools, those rules, those sets of guidelines in order to structure, let's put it that way, to structure our relationship to the world. And as NLPists would say, I'm not a big fan of NLP, by the way, but I love their sayings. The map is not the territory, and I agree with that statement. So at this point, we're going to try to let go of a very sticking idea, which is the belief in fairy tale theories. What's a fairy tale theory? It's the belief in, or the search, or the hope in the magical trick that will solve all our problems and save us at the same time. But that's pure fantasy. So now let's go back to leadership. The first manuals of leadership are from the end of the 18th century, so they're about 150 years old. So for more than 150 years old, we've seen a variety of doctrines of managerial and leadership theories, and all of those theories offer a solution on a plate to the question of management of men and women. So for more than 150 years, each doctrine has at its time its share of success and failures, and while waiting to be replaced by the next. And I'll give you some examples. We've seen, of course, Taylorism, Toyotism, participative management, lean management, agile management, and more recently, armocracy, holacracy, and so on. So those are typical examples of these leadership and management doctrines. Now, there is a very interesting book I recommend you to read. It's Storytelling from Christian Salman. So it's a highly polemical book, but it's a great one. So what does Mr. Salman tell us? 3 things. He talks about the life cycle of leadership theories. So according to him, they went from 15 years in the 50s, 70s to 2.5 years in the 90s. They're probably even shorter today, you know, in 2021. Another thing, those theories would be created by management gurus and consulting firms who identify the collective expectation of an audience of management consumers. So instead of being a real solution to a real problem, they would be created to meet the expectation of an audience. And a last thing, they're designed as a response to the desire of consumption of a public in search of truth and benchmarks. Now let's take a quick look at today's trends. So here are the trends on Google. If you Google leadership, you get 140 million hits. If you try Googling management, it's even better. And last but not least, and just for the sake of it, if you Google love, even better. Yeah, but love will always be number one, so there is no discussion. So now let's look at the trends on Amazon. I search leadership on Amazon, and here is the list. That's only the first page, by the way. So we've got value creating leadership, entrepreneurial leadership, conscious leadership, regenerative leadership, spiritual intelligence leadership. That's pretty interesting. Social intelligence leadership. That's probably from Daniel Goleman's work. I love the next one, the 21 irrefutable laws of leadership. So if you're looking for truths and guidelines, go by this one. We've got virtuous leadership, the U theory leadership. That's from Otto Schalmer, the Tao of leadership, and primal leadership, releasing the power of emotional intelligence. Oh no, that's the one from Daniel Goleman. Okay. So the list goes on, obviously, and all this book will give you rules, tricks, and guidelines for leadership, but they will also be outdated in a few months, and at best in a few years. So now the big question: where do we go from here? My aim is to discuss and to bring light. To bring to light the limits of trends and to go a little deeper than that. So what's deeper? If you go deeper, you will find what we call the invariance, the underlying fundamental principles which are transversal and who pass the generations, as we will see. So maybe here is a quick difference. Between trends and invariance. So if you look at trends, they have a limited lifespan. They're driven by an underlying ideology, set of values. They're created as a response to collective expectations. They're often marketed as a set of solutions, and they're arguably highly replaceable. On the other hand, if we look at invariance, they stood the test of time. They're old as humanity. They're applicable in every economical, political, and social context. So they are transversal. They're part of our deep behavioral mechanism and human nature, as we will see. And no matter how hard you try, you can't get rid of them because they define us. Okay. So now, of course, the big question: what are these invariants? So, a quick disclaimer here. For once, I'm going to give you a list, but it's a highly subjective list. It's my list, and we can discuss it. So don't hesitate to disagree with that list. Another thing is, as you will see, it's a metaphoric list. So don't be surprised by the terminology. And I'm only going to give you an overview here. We won't have time to go into details in every invariant. So it's just going to be an overview, but we will take time to explore more the last one, which is trust. All right. So number one. The first invariant would be culture as the matrix of possibilities. So the idea here is that culture determines us and shapes what we call the behavioral landscape. Depending of the color of the culture, you will have a culture of trust or distrust, of cooperation or competition, of care, or performance, and so on. Okay, so that's the basic idea, and the key for leadership here is to shape the culture that will allow trust to exist and to emerge. All right. Second invariant. That's the what I call the iceberg metaphor, understanding the informal dimension of the organization. That means having the courage, because it takes real courage to do that, to dive under the surface and to face the sharks. So what are the sharks? The sharks are the informal reality we can see in the field, and what I call the color of the interaction, the ways people interact together, and the ways they behave. So, and as I said, it takes real courage to go there, because it's not easy for leadership to take a hard look at what's really going on under the surface, and it's an invitation to leave Wonderland, or to leave the ivory tower we've built to take a real interest on what's going on in the field. All right. Number 3. The hero's journey metaphor, deep human stories and the power of fiction. So I'm not going to explain this one too much now, because we'll go more into details later on this talk. So I'm just going to leave it at that for now. Number 4, that's the conspiracy metaphor, understanding player strategies and power dynamics. If you're interested on that subject, I highly recommend you to read the work of Michel Crozier and Erhard Friedberg, the two founders of the sociology of organization theories. That's just brilliant work, and you'll find all the answers you might be looking for regarding power dynamics. So, number 5, the conatus metaphor, channeling the individual desires towards a common goal. So the conatus is a concept I stole from Spinoza, the philosopher. It's a brilliant concept. So Spinoza defines it as the innate inclination of a being to continue to exist and improve itself. The innate inclination of a being to continue to exist and improve itself. So what does that mean? Every living being, plants, animals, humans, are driven by a dynamic of what we call a dynamic of expansion. That means growth, expanding one's territory, or just self-development, economical, psychological, personal development, spiritual development. So in order to improve one's situation. So that's, by the way, that's a real gem here. It's the fundamentals of every types of motivational theories. So the desire to improve one's situation. The core mechanism here for leadership is to channel this desire for improvement towards a common goal, and that's what every corporate culture should be doing. Okay. Now, last but not least, the double-edged sword metaphor, trust as an invariant of individual and collective performance. And this is the one we're going to explore. I'm going to go more into details here. So let's explore trust together. Okay, maybe something a little basic to start. That's the the biological angle of trust. So this is quite well documented. Trust is biochemically stimulated by oxytocin. Some call it the hormone of love or the hormone of trust, the hormone of social attachment and affiliation. And we find it in every evolved mammals as well as in humans. So there's countless studies about the positive impact of oxytocin on comportamental development and on social behavior. This is so important because if you deprive children, they did the experiment in Romania under Ceausescu, and in the US in the 40s. They were called closet children. It's a horrible story. So if you deprive children from affection, emotional and physical affection, the damages on the brain are considered irreversible, and those children will develop profound and incurable antisocial behavior. So that's how far it goes, the power of oxytocin. So now, what about trust in groups? If we look at it from the ethological perspective, here's what we find. In animal groups, or if let's say evolved mammal groups, things are quite simple. The size of the group is quite small. A chimp community has between 40 and 100 members. So it's quite small, and all the individuals have grown up together and they know each other. So there is no big surprise here. And I know there are rivalries and things like that, but everybody knows everybody. Another thing is that in animal communities, the boundaries are very clear. You have on one hand, you have the members of your community that you know and you trust. And on the other hand, all the others are considered as potential enemies. So the boundaries are very, very clear. So now, what about trust in human communities? We have, well, it's a bit more complicated. First of all, we have the problem of the size of the group. As I said, chimps groups have between 40 and 100 members, but we live in cities of hundreds of thousands, sometimes millions of people, and we don't know each other. We don't know each other. We haven't grown up together. You don't know your neighbors. Well, maybe you do a little bit, but you don't know what's going on behind closed doors. You haven't chosen your colleagues. You haven't chosen your boss. So under a surface of politeness and socialization, we are basically living among strangers. So that's one problem. And the second problem is that with humans, as I said earlier, we're pretty chaotic, and nothing is really clear with humans. There's a lot of confusion going on. We have a lot of doubts. We don't know ourselves. We think we do, but in reality, we don't. Okay, maybe you've read a few self-development books, but that doesn't do it. Sorry. So you don't know yourself, and we change our minds all the time, and that makes it very difficult to be able to really trust each other. It adds to the confusion. Okay, so now the question is, how do we build trust in that context? I'm going to give you an answer. That's not an exhaustive answer, but it's okay, one answer. So we create trust through the power of fiction. What does that mean? We create narratives. We create stories to bind us. And I'm going to give you a few examples. So we are what I call narrative creatures. We grew up with fairy tales. We like to watch movies. We tell ourselves stories all the time. Stories about who we are, stories about who the others are, stories about our plans, our goals, our futures. We project our frame of references on the others and on the world all the time, which is, by the way, the root of all frustrations and disillusions. But that's another topic. So let me give you another example. There is a very interesting story. It's the story of Fides. So Fides was the goddess of trust under the Roman Empire. She was the goddess of trust, of faith. She was the mother. She was the goddess of integrity in international and commercial transactions. So now, imagine a world where tens of thousands, probably hundreds of thousands of barbarian tribes had to be conquered. Well, that's from the Roman perspective. I'm pretty sure that the barbarians had another idea, but okay, they had to be pacified and conquered. So how did they do that? Every conquered tribe had to pledge alliance to Fides, to the goddess of trust, and in return, they were provided so-called protection by the Romans. So this is just a brilliant idea, because conflict was replaced by mutual trust, and that's how well, basically through a magic trick, through a fiction, and that's how Fides, the fiction of Fides, served the expansion of the Roman Empire. So now, what about trust in our modern society? We don't have Fides anymore, but it's exactly the same principle. We make up collective stories, collective narratives, collective ideologies to create a sense of community and belonging. And here are some of our modern myths or fictions. Democracy, free will, liberty, autonomy. Those are fictions that are contradicted by almost every psychological and biological evidence, but still we believe in them. We could add feminism and collapsology to the mix. I'm sorry, I don't want to be too polemic, but yeah, those are fiction, and we believe in them. But in return, we are accepted by the group, and yeah, we get a sense of community, of belonging. So that's the power of fiction. But it goes deeper than that. Now, I'm going to make a bold statement, and feel free to disagree. I'm going to try to prove my point. So the bold statement is the following. Trust is so present in our lives that we don't see it anymore. We're literally blinded by trust. Trust is so present in our lives, we don't see it anymore. So I know that there are ratings, international ratings of the level of trust regarding the different countries and governments. France is very low on the scale, by the way. To the French audience, I love you guys, no problem, but you know you're very low on the scale. So there are ratings, but even in these countries, I believe that trust is implicit, and we don't see it. So I'm gonna, okay, let's do a little exercise here. Try to imagine a society based on the opposite of trust, on distrust. So what would happen? You wouldn't dare to buy groceries because you know the food might be poisoned. You wouldn't leave your children at school because who knows what might happen. You would have no friends. You wouldn't trust anyone. You wouldn't dare to go out and cross the street because a car might intentionally drive you over or run you over. So life would be hell and unsustainable. It would be just hell and complete paranoia. So now we're going to go back to leadership because it works exactly the same way. Trust is implicit. So we just saw that trust is not really a choice because distrust is no viable alternative. So, but there are two sides of the coin of trust. So we all know about the positive. We usually all know about the positive side of trust for management and leadership. There's a whole range of literature about the subject, but this is a two-sided coin. So now let's explore the first one. Let's call it the bright side of trust. So one basic principle first, and I suppose everybody agrees on that. The higher the trust and the more it's systematically reinforced, the more the group can rise and perform. One more time, the higher the trust and the more it's systematically reinforced, the more the group can rise and perform. Yeah, I guess everybody agrees on that. That's kind of basic. But now I'll give you some example of the bright side, the positive side of trust. So all the great collective achievements, like social, political, scientific, architectural. We've got the Great Wall of China here, were made with trust, with some kind of trust. We've got the good side of the technological revolution. All the great discoveries in the fields of medicine and pharmacology. Some diseases like variola were eradicated by vaccine. So I know it's a bit of a polemic, but still, that's the positive side. In the middle, it's a picture of a child being saved by a prosthetic aorta by René Prêtre, if you know him. So, and on the right, of course, the team achievements. That's the Lakers, 2020 NBA champions. Okay, so that's quite well-known things. The positive side of trust. Now, let's explore the other side of the coin. There is a deep and well, honestly, quite disturbing inclination in humans to blindly follow orders. So here is the other side of the coin. Under Nazi Germany, only 2% of the population were resistant. All the others, they just follow orders with various degrees of participation. So only 2% of resistance. On the right, it's the Khmer Rouge revolution. So 1.7 million victims between 1975 and 1979. So Duke, who was one of the political leaders, at his trial, he was asked, why did you do that? Duke, by the way, he was solely responsible to the death of 15,000 people, just by himself. So he was asked why he did it, and he had a great, very honest answers. He said, "I wanted my boss to trust me and to be promoted like everybody else." That's a great answer. On the left, the lower left corner, that's the Milgram experiment. So it's a pretty well-known experiment, the obedience to authority experiment, 1961. So in short, it was a series of experiments conducted at Yale University by Stanley Milgram, where the participants were ordered to administer electric shocks to subjects, and the subjects were actors. There was no real electric shock involved, but the participants didn't know it. So what happened? 65% of the participants went beyond the lethal limit. 65%. Okay, so you might think that was in the 60s, a long time ago. Now that was 60 years ago. So things would be different now. We're more civilized and educated, and we would be more willing to resist. So guess what? they redid the experiment in 2010. That's the lower right picture. Le jeu de la mort, the game of death. That's not the Bruce Lee movie, by the way. That's another version of the Milgram experiment. So it was the same version under guise of reality show, and with the additional pressure of public conformity. So what was the result? This time, 80% of the participants went beyond the little limit. 80%. So this is basically the dark side of our human nature. And if you believe that, that's another thing. If you believe that you're the exception and you would be part of the resistance, you're fooling yourself. Statistically, I mean, there is a greater chance you would be amongst the oppressors, and me too. You know, I'm no exception. So, okay. Now, this is a quote by Stanley Milgram, and I'm not going to read it, so I just let you read it. All right, so now a good question. Why does this happen? And what does it tell us about the dark side of trust? So there are several factors to explain this. There is a psychological factor. We are really poorly armed to defy authority and contest the community that feeds us. That's the first thing. To resist requires an almost supernatural energy, because it means fighting our nature, it means fighting our culture, and it means fighting our reference group. So resisting doesn't come easy. And that's very interesting. From a developmental psychology perspective, there is an explanation to the fact that some people, the 2%, have this capacity to resist. If the first no of our childhood had been welcomed, we would be potentially more able to resist. So this hypothesis is very interesting. The hypothesis would be that the quality of attention given to the child and the capacity to listen to your child plays a key role for developing this ability to resist. All right. So now let's leave the dark side and go back to our subject. Let's go back to leadership. There are two quotes I really like about related to trust and related to some of the concepts I mentioned earlier. The first quote is from Machiavelli. To govern is to make I'm sorry, I don't see the okay. Is to lead people to believe. All right. To govern is to lead people to believe. So this is a great quote. On a positive way, that could be an invitation for leadership to be a source of inspiration. It could be an invitation for having an inspiring vision, to be able to share it, and etc. Okay, that's the positive interpretation. Now, on the other hand, it could also mean to be able to play with the natural inclination of people for trust and make them think and act accordingly to our plans. So I know it sounds a bit Machiavellical, but that's from Machiavelli. So, you know, what do you expect? So it sounds Machiavellical, but it's basically what every corporate culture does. That's the principle I mentioned earlier, the Conatus principle. So they capture the individual desires and channel them towards a common goal. And again, there is not one single company that doesn't do it. So I know we're not in fairy tales territory anymore, but neither is the corporate world. So that's the reality. Now, another quote I really like, this time from Aristotle. To govern is to disappoint. This is a great quote because we humans are creatures of desire, and it's just impossible for leadership to meet all the expectations. That's an invitation to give up on another sticking idea. That's the impossible desire to make everyone happy. And no matter what the leadership does, there will be always some boost of motivation, some feelings of disappointment, and therefore there will be breaches, what we call breaches of trust. Now, here is what's at stake for leadership. Here is a little, to-do list. So, to mobilize trust, to be trustworthy, to be credible, and to make people believe in the vision, the strategy, the goal, the culture, etc. Okay, that's Machiavelli's idea. Now, here are 3 traps for leadership regarding trust, and they're often forgotten. I've never seen those traps mentioned in any corporate values or anything like that. So that's a real blind spot. So number 1 is breach of trust. There is a paradox here. There is no, as we saw, there is no collective performance without trust. So in some way, it's indispensable, but it's also very fragile. Trust breaks at the first sign of deception or treason. And we all have experienced breaches of trust, either by being deceived or by deceiving others, or sometimes even by deceiving ourselves. So this is a pretty common one. There is a quote I love from Jean-Paul Sartre regarding breaches of trust. Trust is gained in drops and lost in liters. Trust is gained in drops and lost in liters. Great quote. So let's go to number 2. The number 2 is blind trust. So this is the typical image of corporate propaganda. I really hate it, but it's very significative of this principle of blind trust. So blind trust falls in the same category as blind faith. It's based on the mechanism I mentioned before, so the human inclination to blindly follow orders and the supernatural strength that resisting requires. Okay, blind trust. Number 3. Interestingly enough, in French, we only have one word for trust, which also means confidence. That's confiance. Avoir confiance means trusting others and being self-confident. So the third trap would be the excess of trust, the excess of confidence. And I'm going to give you two examples. On the right, it's the grounding of Swissair. So Swissair was the Swiss national airline company. It was a national pride and almost a national emblem for unity. So after a series of bad business decisions, the Swissair got into serious financial difficulties. So in 2001, they benefited from the help of the Swiss government and from the Swiss banks. And at this time, nobody thought that it could ever go bankrupt. Nobody. It was just impossible. It was such a national institution. So guess what? On the 2nd October of 2001, the company couldn't longer pay its bill, and all the flights got suspended. And as a result, 39,000 passengers were grounded. So that's a great example of excess of confidence. We went from oh, this company will never go bankrupt. It's just impossible. It's a national pride. To 39,000 passengers grounded in a very short time. The other example I'm going to give you, that's a more recent one. It's the Reddit attack on Wall Street. And that's also a great example of excess of confidence. So what basically happened here is the Wall Street Bets was a forum on Reddit, the website, where amateur traders coordinated a massive buying strategy on GME stocks, GameStop shop stocks. And as a result, the several hedge funds went bankrupt. They lost hundreds of millions. So far so good. That was the first part of the attack. It was a massive success. David had beaten Goliath. Everybody was surfing a wave of enthusiasm, and they planned the second part of the attack, which was going after AMC stock, another company. But this time the hedge funds were ready, and they managed to block the main trading platform that the retail traders used. Robinhood was blocked for I think 1 day or 2, and as a result, thousands of people lost all their money, and the hedge funds got a lot richer. So that's another example. They went from we beat Goliath and we're going to go after AMC stocks to we lost all our money, excess of confidence. There is another example, but I'm only going to mention it. If you have the chance, go watch Fire Festival, the greatest party that never happened. That's a documentary on Netflix. It's a great story about a young entrepreneur who wants to organize the greatest VIP festival of all time on the island of Pablo Escobar, and the whole journey is a disaster. At the end, the festival becomes a huge scam. And what's really fascinating is this guy, during the whole story, he keeps saying, "We're gonna make it. We're gonna make million. It's gonna be okay." And until right before his trials, he's gonna go to trial, and he says, "No, I'm never going to go to jail, and I'm gonna make millions." And guess what? He went to jail, and he had to pay 26 millions US as a fine. So excess of trust. Now, I'm almost done. Here is a little leadership checklist regarding trust. So leadership should aim to inspire trust, be reliable and credible, to create, develop, and manage trust, to assess the areas of uncertainty to reduce doubt and anxiety, to identify the excesses of confidence, and to anticipate the risk of abuse. Now, at the beginning of this talk, I made you a promise. I said that you would end up with more questions than answers. So here are the question, and this is a trust health check question everybody should ask himself in order to see how it goes regarding trust. So number one, is my leadership credible and trustworthy? A little, a lot. Do my partners, my clients, my employees feel in good hands with me? And how can I assess it? That's not an exhaustive list of questions, by the way. So number two, is my service, my team, my company credible? What could we do to be even more credible? Number three, am I determined to create an explicit culture of trust? What time and resources do I spend on creating and developing trust and engagement? Do I regularly check the barometer of trust? And lastly, how do I anticipate the risk of breach of trust, blind trust, and excess of confidence? So that's it. Thank you very much. I finished with questions, so maybe you might have some questions for me, and I'll be happy to discuss any of the polemical topics I brought up with you now. Okay.
Thank you so